Hi, and welcome to the Thrive Alcohol-Free podcast. I'm Dupe Witherick, alcohol-free wellbeing and transformational coach, and the best-selling author of A Cocktail of Clarity, How to Ditch Drinking, Embody a Joyful New Identity, and Thrive Alcohol-Free. This podcast will show you that being alcohol-free is not what the traditional narrative says. And even though alcohol is so ingrained in our society that it is okay to give yourself permission to stop drinking if you want to. And you do not have to wait until you hit rock bottom. It is certainly not boring, and I believe ditching drinking is just the start to living an extraordinary life. By getting rid of this one thing, it allows the doors to open to endless possibilities and opportunities. Each week, we will have guests on who are at various stages of the alcohol-free journey, from those who are curious to those who have been alcohol-free for years. We will also have experts on talking about different topics relating to alcohol and beyond. Through these conversations, you will discover what it means to thrive alcohol-free. Enjoy. So welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for being on the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast today. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to join you and talk about thriving alcohol free.
Yay! And you're coming up to 1,000 days alcohol free, which is really, really exciting. So let's start with, maybe for those people that might not know you, why don't you give a brief introduction as to who you are and how you happen to be on the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast?
Well, I'll start with that actually. How we came to connect was through a membership, Kathy Heller. And there weren't many ladies from the UK in there. And not only that, we had the Sobriety Sober in common. And I think it was about October. It's probably about a year ago.
Yeah, it's been about a year.
Actually.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing, isn't it? Where does time
Yeah.
go?
I know. And you did invite me at that point to come on to your podcast. I declined at that point because I think I was still working it out, to be honest. I'm still working it out. It's certainly not a done deal for sure. But yeah, it felt more kind of aligned the timing for me anyway, to do this interview. This October 2024. So thank you. So what was the beginning bit of the question? Where did it all start?
Yeah, I'd love to hear your story.
Well, you haven't got time for the whole story. There was 54 years of that, Dupe, but a condensed, and you're supposed to say 4, you don't look it. That's fine.
You didn't give me a chance, Laura. You absolutely don't.
I tell you, the one thing thriving alcohol free is I do think it makes you age backwards. I really do. Yeah. But let's go back on track, which was where it all began, really. Well, I suppose this journey, if you like, I think is a bit like my second chapter. I think about it. The second chapter being that I finally, after probably 30 years, at least the last 20 of those years, with a problematic alcohol use, I was a daily dependent drinker. And it was the 28th of February 2022 that I finally quit. And I knew straight away that this was it for good. It felt different. It felt different in my body. So much came together, I suppose, because that journey to sobriety started many, many years ago, going to, I think, yeah, in my 20s, I first started to realise that my drinking was probably a bit different to some other people's drinking. I was always first to the bar, first to finish the first drink, and last to leave. And that would be via the off license or supermarket to ensure my drinking just did not end when they used to ring last orders. And yeah, there were times when I had control over my drinking, when I wanted to get pregnant. I really reduced my drinking massively. I quit smoking as well around that time. But I didn't fully give up whilst I was pregnant. And I remember the justification while I was breastfeeding that it was okay because I was drinking, do you know, Mackerson's stout? The Mackerson stout in the little cans. I knew it was, can I swear?
Yeah, of course you can.
It was BS. It was total bullshit that it was going to be good for me in iron, but that was the justification. So yeah, during breastfeeding, I was drinking Mackie stouts and reading Alan Carr. I think was probably around about 2004, 2003, and I think that then started to help with the brainwashing. It started to dismantle. But then that brought in cognitive dissonance, which was a whole other level of pain because there was part of me that saw through the brainwashing. And I would have those moments where I would have those chats with myself and know that alcohol was a problem. Yeah, I had times when I think I quit for a month once, but it was awful. It was just white knuckling. I was avoiding people and places. I was miserable when I wasn't drinking. So, yeah, that went on for many years. And I worked in substance misuse services for 14 years. And during that time, I studied mindfulness. I did was it the 8 week or 12 week mindfulness based stress reduction. It was really hard to begin with, trying to build a mindfulness practice, but there's one thing, I'm quite tenacious. I've got that willpower center in my human design. So yeah, I stuck at it and an amazing thing happened. I had a bit of an epiphany during that point. And I still remember it, where I felt triggered emotionally by something. And I thought, I'm just going to do the mindfulness thing. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to allow it to come. And I remember it vividly that, I mean, my emotions back then, I think, were a lot more raw and a lot more painful. And it kind of rose up inside of me and then just disappeared because I sat there and allowed it. I didn't try to jump up and grab a drink or keep busy, or that was one of my classic. I would never sit still, just keep working, pushing, pushing, working. I suppose now what I know is I've, very compulsive, obsessive part of me, which I understand now as being, I do internal family systems within my somatic, which I'm sure we'll come on to, but they were just protector parts of me that were there to try and keep me from the exiled parts of myself, the emotional wounds, so to speak. So yeah, mindfulness came in, and then I think it was in 2015 I did mindfulness-based relapse prevention. I used to go into the old mindfulness, it's fantastic, and got the team doing mindfulness in team meetings, and let's bring in mindfulness-based relapse prevention into our offerings in the service. Meanwhile, I'm still a problematic drinker. The irony is not lost on me, for sure. But I couldn't let it go. And if I'm absolutely honest, that day on the 28th of February, I had COVID and I was ill, and I'd had a really heavy weekend drinking in London. And I cried out that evening because I was so ill I couldn't drink. So I knew I was going into withdrawal. So I was struggling with the demons. Not that there's a part of me that's a demon, that's not what I'm saying, but it was a dark point. And I cried out that evening for help, not believing that anyone but me could help me. But I'd always believed in angels. I always believed in something other. And actually, it's part of this story, if you like, is I've been putting my story back together since gaining the clarity which you gain once you do become alcohol free. But I'll pause that for a moment and come back to that. But yeah, the night of the 28th of February, I just knew intuitively it was like a spiritual moment. And every day was a blessing, a gratitude. And from that day on, I've never once honestly felt a craving. There are times when I've gone, there's an emotional need there, and some of my old ways of dealing with that crop up. But I I just don't think that alcohol is, I've still got other things that I self-medicate with, which again we'll probably come on to. But yeah, from the alcohol side of things, that quitting bit was the was the easy bit when I finally got to it. It's like that making a decision, that going all in. There was no more toing and froing. There was no more hopscotching. It was this ultimate. I had enough data, I had enough information to know that I could not moderate. I'd come to that part of thinking. I knew it had to be all or nothing. And I think I worked through a number of months coming to terms with that, almost like a maybe a grieving process of a loss, that feeling that maybe that part of my life was going to end. But, but the day that I did finally quit, it was completely the opposite. It was never about anything that I was giving up. It was every day was a blessing. Every day there was something to be grateful for. I used to focus so much on my mornings, wake up and think how wonderful to wake up without that regret, that shame. Because for the best part of probably 15 years, every morning it was like Groundhog Day. It was a, a waking up to just that self hatred and that shame that I had ended another day in the blare of alcohol. The morning would be a promise that today was going to be different. Today was the day that I was going to quit. But then I would get to 3 o'clock, and then already the justifications came in, and by 5 o'clock, yeah, the wine was open and off I went again. And that cycle, yeah. So yeah, quite a bit in there.
Thank you so much for sharing and being so vulnerable with it as well, because I'm sure the person listening might just hear something that really resonates with them. And I wanted to touch on that spiritual moment. It seems really common that I think we all have that sort of inner knowing, and it's whether we choose to trust it or not, or believe it, or even take action. And as you say, you were all in. It was, you made that decision. You knew you couldn't moderate, and it was all or nothing. So you chose to follow it. But you touched on angels. I'd love to hear a little bit about what that experience was and how has that impacted you since.
Yeah, I think it was a looking up to the sky, to the ceiling, and saying, enough, I've had enough, I give up.
Mm.
But asking for help within that.
Mm.
But then not really the next day thinking, oh, it's going to be fine. The universe has got my back type thing. Not at all. There was that came a little bit further down the line again, where I started to dialogue with myself, the inner knowing, the intuition started to become clearer. And I know that I had that as a teenager. I know I had that as a child. And I've traced that back as I've tried to kind of piece my life story together. And once the alcohol was gone, and I mean, I have to say at this point, 2 weeks before I quit alcohol, I'd started a menopausal group, not knowing that I was going to stick at it, and but I did. And that was a strength training. It was a group of women who we were in the similar boat. We were pretty isolated, lost with the menopause. And that gave me a community at that point. And it also gave me a body-based practice. It gave me something to do 2 nights a week. And a couple of weeks after I quit, they brought in a yoga teacher for one of those sessions. And I was really up for it. I've not had anything to do with yoga or Pilates, anything. And I followed the lady. I wept. This immersion just came through my body on that yoga mat, that session. And I cried and I couldn't sleep that evening because something had awoken. And from that point, I did start a yoga practice, which I don't know if this is answering your question, do feel fair, but yoga brought me to, I suppose, that mindfulness practice that I'd forgotten, which is a slowing down, building an awareness of myself within that space on the mat, and building a relationship with myself in a way that I'd never done before. And there was a part of my ego going, yeah, let's do a plank. I've got a competitive kind of streak within me that did drive me, but there was something else happening. I used to get these amazing downloads, I used to call them. Inspiration is what I know of them now, on the yoga mat. So to find that quietness, to be able to hear that inspiration coming down, to listen to that inner knowing, that inner intuition was, was just fantastic. And this inner journey, this connection to who I am within, which I really believe alcohol had kept me disconnected from. And I actually do think now that that was, again, another one of those parts of me, protective part in a way, to keep me from some of that shame and those emotional wounds. Because I suppose what I haven't alluded to at this point is that I had, in some regards, an okay childhood. In part, the first 5 years of my life, as you would expect them to be, but that took a bit of a change, and I was exposed to probably a good 3 or 4 years of emotional and physical abuse within a family relationship, which was difficult. So I know that a lot of my alcohol use was in part because of unresolved emotional difficulties that stemmed from childhood trauma, childhood abuse. And when I said earlier that this was kind of like my second chapter, my first chapter began when I was 27, because I did have a breakdown. I suffered quite badly with depression, and yeah, I did an attempted suicide. It wasn't an attempt at suicide. I tried to take my own life. And that led me to spend 6 weeks in a mental health unit where I had, yeah, I used to say it was a feeling of being reborn. But what followed that was a spiritual awakening for the very first time. It was like a veil being revealed of a whole new perspective on life and me and the system I was in. And I did a lot of psychotherapy at that time, and my CPN back then was very much into inner child work. I did a lot of Charles Bradshaw, I think he was called, the inner child within. Did a lot of that work back then. And then I got into Reiki and kind of energy healing. And if I was honest, I think back then at 27, I felt like I wanted to be a healer, and I felt there was a kind of a psychic nature about me. But then the, that that voice of doubt, that inner critic wanting to keep me safe, said, "You can't do that. That's not safe." So off you go to university, and fantastic. I wouldn't change any of it. But interestingly, that fear back then, I suppose, of yeah, maybe what I was being called to do back then, which is where I feel I am now. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It's amazing how life works out, and you end up being where you're meant to be. And you're never too late, I believe. You're always wherever you are at the right time. But those experiences do change you and help you become who you are today. And I'm so sad that you felt that you had no other choice but to try to take your life at 27. But it is amazing what people go through. And again, for just sharing that so bravely, I really appreciate it. But it's obvious that that inner child work, that mindfulness, the psychotherapy has all been things that you've learned, which I'm sure you're now applying and helping others with, which is
Absolutely.
you've got there. And I imagine you've worked so much on yourself over the 27 years since it happened, that you've no doubt got so much wisdom to share,
Yeah, and
which is
I was just going to say, and within that time, 19 years ago, I'm never going to have children
mm,
because of my experiences. But I'm glad that I remember that was another time I went back into therapy because it was just like there was this calling inside of me. Again, listening to the gut, listening to the gut feeling at that time. But then the head
mm,
was going, no, you can't. You can't do
mm,
this. But then that took me back into therapy to work through. I'm so glad to say that the the body won at that point.
yeah,
It won out, and yeah, and I became a mother, and I threw everything at that role. I'd say 18 years because he left home when he just after he turned 18 to go follow his dreams. Um, and yeah, just it's hard sometimes that at 54 there is a part of me there that thinks, oh, I've left it too late. um, there is an urgency sometimes that I do feel, which I'm learning to sit with and to allow that unfolding to happen as it should be. And this chapter two, if you like, is very much still around that healing journey. So that first 18 months of being alcohol free was just, I think I've heard lots of people talk about the sober glow and how wonderful it was. And it was, and it still is. But I think I made a conscious decision to revisit the healing part of the journey. I think part, again, listening to my intuition, I was getting the downloads on the yoga mat to say, you need to do more than this. And I felt that calling. I felt that call, like you, to be here to coach and support other, other men and women who are maybe feeling that call themselves, whether they've been sober curious for a while or are already sober. And that's where this second chapter has led me to. I've trained in yoga nidra and vinyasa yoga, and I'm training to be a somatic therapist, which is part of my healing journey. I'm also in somatic trauma therapy, which is hard. There's no two ways about that. But the gains from it far outweigh going into the pain sometimes. Yeah, it's good. I feel quite blessed, really. Yeah. But an interesting thing was from alcohol, I replaced it with other things. I think you've probably come across that kind of cross addiction. Mine did get a bit focused on my weight for a while with the weight training. And then I kind of let that go. I realized that that was probably not serving me. Don't get me wrong, I think strength training and weight training is a fabulous thing to do for the body. But the drivers for me, it's that thing. Alcohol, okay, I do think it is a poison, but for some people, they can just have the one drink, can't they? And that's fine. But for me, yeah, it's noticing where my mind goes with these things. And I suppose that drive, that obsessive compulsiveness switched to weight. And then from that, it went to shopping. And then it went to meditation. It did go to these, I suppose, spiritual practices. And then I realized that I was spiritually bypassing some of the unresolved trauma that was still there. And then my final vice, well, that's not true. I still lean a little bit on snacking when I'm maybe feeling a bit bored or a bit sad or a bit tired. I might eat too many nuts or crisps. But I gave up vaping the beginning of this year. And I think that was at the point really when, yeah, I knew that this was a serious healing journey because I'd been, vaping to push those impulses, those emotions down. And then by removing that, that was probably the last biggest barrier for sure. I know some people go back to drinking when they've got that kind of mindful awareness and approach. But for me, I'd rather not. I'd rather be that knowing that I don't need to have something for Dutch courage anymore, or which was a big thing for me when I was back as a teenager, that wanting to fit in and feel comfortable, that social anxiety. I don't need it for that anymore. Yeah. So yeah, quite a lot.
Replacing alcohol with other things is absolutely something that cross addiction is very common. And you talked about snacking. Sugar is a key thing that people substitute when they stop drinking, because obviously they are not getting as much sugar as they were from alcohol. Alcohol has a lot of sugar in it, but also just because it's something to do. But shopping is again another very common one. I remember when I stopped drinking, I had so many Amazon packages that seemed to arrive on the doorstep every day. So I completely get that. And then the working out and the strength training and the meditation, they're positive things, right? But then you can get a bit obsessed with doing those, but they're definitely the healthier habits that I would encourage people to do. And then obviously to give up vaping as well is fantastic. And so you've actually got rid of a lot of the negative things. It was interesting. You mentioned something about the impact that, alcohol being a poison, but it's also, you've been talking a lot about your intuition and being able to hear those downloads and get that inspiration. In Arabic, alcohol actually means is alcohol, which means body eating spirit. And so fundamentally, there's no way you're going to be able to channel things or hear anything because you aren't yourself, you're not able to access it. A lot of people say, but when you stop drinking, you start manifesting, you start really getting those downloads because you have that clarity of mind, and things like yoga and meditation really help. But it's also a real challenge to sit in those emotions. So one of the things I help people with is really, how do they manage those emotions? What tools do they need to manage those emotions? How do you start to actually identify emotions? Because I think people think they're like four emotions. You're happy, you're sad, you're angry. That's not the case. There's so many more emotions, and actually being able to name those emotions, sitting those emotions, let them wash over you, as it were, and really process them and not shy away from them or numb them through something else is so important to, one, start to heal, but to really just be able to manage every day and feel like you can cope with anything that comes your way. And then the other thing that amused me, didn't amuse me, but we are so hard on ourselves, aren't we? And you talked about the inner critic, and you said at 54 you feel like you're too late. And actually, that's the story you're telling yourself, because you're not too late. I had Janet Garand on my podcast a while ago, and she started Tribe Sober, but she stopped drinking at 64. And she's now in her 70s. She looks absolutely amazing. You wouldn't think she's in her 70s at all. And she's just started she's got this huge community, global community, which she started in South Africa. And she's from the UK originally, but moved to South Africa. And she's just a huge inspiration. And with the human design piece in my mind, I was thinking, I wonder if your gate 28 in your splenic center is colored in, because if that is one of your strengths, the fear of that is running out of time. And so potentially there is that link there. And so you're actually working in your shadow. So it's really trying not to worry about that running out of time and know that you're exactly where you need to be right now.
Yeah, I've got that gate 28, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I thought you might do.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, and so you talked a lot about yoga, and it's again something I feel like yoga and running are the common things that people who stop drinking take up. And I think a lot of people are aware of yoga and meditation. I'd love to delve a bit more into the somatic work that you do, because I think that could be helpful for people to better understand what that is and how that can potentially help in this journey as well.
Yeah. I mean, yoga is a form of somatic
Yeah, it's movement.
work. Somatic means body, soma,
Yeah.
body. So there are a number of practices that come under the umbrella of somatic therapy, yoga being one of them. Yoga Nidra, very much so, which is kind of where I've particularly swung more to. I'm aware that there are a lot of barriers for people in a yoga asana practice, poses. And I myself spent 7 months in a wheelchair back in 2016. I've always had this ongoing issue with my knees, but anyway, to say that I couldn't walk, and I'm aware of that barrier for people. And that's what I think led me towards somatics, because not everybody can get down on the mat. So that's the first thing I want to say, is that you don't need to be able to do a plank or sit cross-legged on a mat to be able to access what yoga is. Yeah. So somatics brings in the spiritual aspect of yoga. There's breath work. A big part of it is, which I'm sure if your audience has been online, polyvagal theory, so nervous system regulation. plays a key role in this approach. So it's about seeing ourselves through the lens of our nervous system and knowing that predominantly there are 3 states that we can be in, and we spend a lot of our time, and I obviously can see a way of self-medicating with alcohol was a shortcut really for a dysregulated nervous system. I was permanently in fight or flight, just in that stress state. But for some people, coming out of that stress state can feel not safe when you have been used to feeling that way for going back to probably childhood. So we need to build a safety within the body, and that's one of the foundational work that we do in somatic therapy. So we build up a grounding practice, being able to drop into the body, to be able to listen to the body. We feel feelings in the body, not in the head. So we learn a new language as we build up that understanding. And part of that is that being able to create a sense of calm, and that calm in the body. And that takes time to do that. And yes, sometimes a movement practice can really help with that, with how we move in space. I move more confidently, I believe, since taking up yoga and on going on this somatic journey. I held tension in my pelvis, in my hips, and I never even realized that, which is probably why I've had knee issues my whole going back to being a teenager. So this belt of tension was probably something that as a child I couldn't protect myself. So I laid down this armor, if you like, within the body. And so this process of releasing and letting go is what I'm currently working on. There's still that tension there at times, and I have to bring an awareness to that to release it and let it go. But what that's brought is being able to tap into that real felt self of self energy, or prana, as they would call it in yoga. I can feel the energy going through my body, and it's a beautiful feeling. Again, that builds that connection with yourself, and that, I want to say love, but that sends a lot of people running for the hills initially. I know it starts as kindness and then builds in compassion, but it ultimately is a love. And you can't truly be intimate and love others until you've built that love within yourself. And yeah, that's very much the work that we do. I'm sure there's loads of other stuff that I've missed off. It's very, I would say, holistic approach. There's internal family systems is a big part of what we do. So parts work, mindfulness, yeah, I've already mentioned that. Psychology, even the work of Jung comes into it quite a lot. And then of course the chakras, that working with the body's energy. So very much around that. I suppose there's Eastern practices which yoga has brought to the West. It's got a smattering of that as well. Does that help?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And the other things I was thinking of, I don't know if you do them, but I do things like emotional freedom technique, EFT tapping, havening. You just even, if people want to go out today and feel a bit better in their body, just shaking out the body to some music or just silently, just shaking things out to really release that energy and get the body, the blood flowing and get out of your mind, as you say, it was all in the body. And I was thinking about when you were talking about, I was thinking about the work of Gabor Mate with When the Body Says No and other books similar to that, where, we really underestimate how much our body is really thinking and feeling, and we can get all of our answers from the body, versus there are no real answers in the mind. It's just a confusion. So yeah, I think that was really, really helpful.
But I didn't actually say though that is the belief. It is based upon the fact that the body keeps the score, and that trauma is stored within the body, and it's a slow process, and but there's so much wisdom within the body. There really is. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's really helpful for people that maybe want to explore somatic healing. So you've done an amazing thing, because what you've done is your coaching is now somatic sober coaching. So you've added the sobriety element to it. So do you want to talk a bit about your coaching and how that works?
Yeah. So I'm very much at the beginning of that journey, building my business. Feels a bit odd still to think of myself as building a business. So yeah, as you said, somatic sober coaching. At the moment, I'm offering one-to-one coaching packages, very much around working with people with where they're at, really. So whether that is they've already got sober, or maybe they've been sober curious for a while. But it's that fear of failure or fear of missing out, and I'm there for all of that. So I've got some medium 30-day packages where we would look at building the foundational work that's needed, that we've just touched upon. So how you build that kind of safety within the body, and how you are able to build that calm, safe space within the body. And then one of the things that I really want to offer is a connection. So there would be daily Voxer coaching. So for those that kind of don't know what Voxer is, it's a bit like WhatsApp, but it's a bit more walkie-talkie. So you can talk in real time. So whoever I'm working with, they would have access to me via Voxer. And I'm very much moving towards that. Once you remove alcohol, the journey is about tapping into that, the real you. So once we've removed alcohol, what is the passion? What is it that you want to do? And everyone's different, aren't they? Everyone, whether that's to focus more on the wellness side, in terms of building um, a movement practice, or not. It's not for everybody. So you don't have to do yoga, is what I'm trying to say. Although yogic wisdom does influence a lot of what I do, for sure. Yeah. So my coaching would be, very much around building the life that that person doesn't want to escape from anymore, whatever that looks like for them. And I do really believe that aligning with your soul, building that ability to listen to your intuition, to build that self energy, that prana within the body, and then following your soul's purpose, being aligned to the soul. Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at the moment. Further down the line, in a few months, not long, I will be able to offer somatic therapy, which will include access to, I can do the somatic coaching, but with the therapy would be the direct trauma processing. So that's where we use a number of methods to actually process the trauma that's in the body. So yeah, that's kind of coming down the line in a few months' time, which I'm really excited about. Because I'm obviously experiencing that for myself, and it's been so good. Yeah, so good. Does it answer the question?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's great. And the 30-day foundational work sounds really, really great. A great way for people to kick off wherever they are. And it is all about calming the nervous system and regulating your nervous system. We don't appreciate just taking like 3 deep breaths if you're feeling slightly on edge, and just giving yourself that time to do that is huge. And I think learning specific tools that can help you regulate the nervous system is really helpful, whether you're alcohol free or not, but it's essential, really. And it's interesting, isn't it, how all these things weren't really taught at school when we were at school. I know some schools are getting better now, but there's so many things that you think, why did we not learn this as children? We would have been able to cope so much better with that knowledge, and probably wouldn't
Well,
have had to spend so many years getting to the
yeah.
point that we've got to now.
It's interesting that though, because I had a memory the other day that way back when I first qualified in social work, I worked for Barnardo's for a year while they had some funding, and the project was called Protective Behaviours. And do you know what the fundamental aspect of that was? That was teaching children to listen to their body, to listen to their
Wow.
feeling. And yeah, I had this lovely flood of memories come back just recently to think about how important that, because protective behaviours was around stranger danger, but a better approach than that. Because actually, in an emergency, children might need to talk to a stranger because it might be the stranger that can help them. So it was all
Yeah.
about building children's awareness of their gut feeling of when does it not feel okay, and not to keep secrets and yeah, things like that. So that was some years ago. And I know mindfulness is becoming quite popular in a lot of schools, which is fantastic. Yeah. But you're right. But maybe nervous system regulation is the next thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for being on. And as I always do with all my guests, I
Oh, yeah.
end with the question, what does thriving alcohol-free mean to you?
Yeah. Connection was the first word that came to me. And that is about building that connection with yourself, becoming self led, finding that true, true essence of who you are without alcohol. And from that, that ripple effect, which then takes you into more authentic connection with other people, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that answer. Connection is key, isn't it? Connection, they say, is the opposite of addiction. So yeah, it's definitely something that's worth doing. But I like your take on it, that it isn't actually the connection of necessarily a community, but actually connecting with yourself and better understanding yourself and doing things that help you learn about who you are, which one of the reasons I love things like human design, because that's just a real way of getting that understanding, but then of course learning all the somatic tools as well, and being able to trust what you're hearing and what you're thinking is right or feeling is right. They're all really, really great. So I love that. And as you say, you can then connect fully as your authentic self, which is brilliant. So, any last word of wisdom for the listener?
Yeah. I know there is that you are exactly where you need to be right now. And if my help, your help helps somebody get to that day one with alcohol, um, it's that trust, isn't it? It is that it's having that trust in what we're saying, what we're sharing, and what the sober community is raving about. Come join the sober party over here because we're having a lot more fun, I think. Um, don't let fear hold you back. Fear never goes away, but we have to learn to move forward with the fear alongside of us. So don't wait for that motivation or that right point. You make that right point happen for sure. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah, feel the fear and do it anyway. Susan
Yeah,
Jeffers' book,
Shepherd.
and
Yeah.
it is absolutely for me, JOMO. It's the joy of missing out, not the fear of missing out. So absolutely agree with everything you've just said, Laura. Thank you. So how can people get in touch with you if they want to find out more?
I would say Find me on Instagram if that's where you are. I am Laura Starky. I've just recently changed it. And I'm also on Facebook as the Somatic Sober Coach. And from both of those areas, you would find my link in the bio to my link bio. Honestly, all of this was completely new to me. Instagram was just like really hard to work out. How do you, people say, find my link in the bio? And I used to go, what? How do you get to that? So for those that don't know, click on the bit in the top left-hand corner, which is where my name is, and then you'll find the bio, and then there's a link to my link bio. It's all very complicated. But from there, you will find what I suppose my freebies are at the moment. I've got a free Yoga Nidra audio that people can access. I've got my free Transform Your Mornings with my magic morning routine, which I absolutely love and is a big part, even now, my morning practices, my morning routine is really important. And yeah, that's probably a good place to find me, with all the usual ways to get in touch. Drop me a DM, drop me a message, Messenger, or via Instagram. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. Yeah, just get in touch. And I do answer all my messages.
That's so wonderful. Well, thank you again for being on the show, and it's been lovely to speak, and I'm sure I will see you again soon. Take care.
Thanks, Dupe. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe so you get alerted every time I drop a new episode. I'd love it if you could rate, review, and share this episode. Feel free to tag me on Instagram at Thrive Alcohol Free and follow me for daily tips. If you would like to work with me, I offer one-to-one coaching sessions and have my group coaching program. If you're not yet ready for coaching, I also have a self-paced online course, which is a companion to my book, A Cocktail of Clarity. All the links are in the show notes. I will see you in the next episode. Have a wonderful week. Take care.